Hey, folks, welcome to the Battles of the First World War podcast. So this is a first for the podcast for two reasons. First is we have the largest number of guests to appear on the show thus far for this particular discussion. And second, we're going to talk politics. So no need to groan. Yes, we are talking modern politics, but this is for a good reason. This episode is a call to action for America's first women soldiers. The call to action is this. For listeners of this podcast located in the United States, it is time to take political action and ask our Congress members to award the Congressional Gold Medal to the Hello Girls of World War I. When the United States sent millions of her doughboys over there to fight on the World War I battlefields of Belgium and France, we also sent over 223 American women soldiers as well. These were not nurses or ambulance drivers assigned to dangerous work both near and well behind the front. These were the US Army's first women soldiers, assigned as battlefield tactical communication specialists close to the battlefront. Their skills were absolutely critical to the conduct of the American Expeditionary Forces combat operations. These Hello Girls were also quite literally the connection to diplomatic dialogue between the American command and its allies, as well as a vital link to the AEF's logistical operations as well. When these brave women returned to the US well after the First World War ended, their vital role was quickly forgotten and their efforts to be recognized ignored for decades. The Hello Girls were finally recognized as US Army soldiers in the late 1970s, with some of the last survivors receiving their discharge forms in 1979. Today, while other groups of female service members have been recognized, the Hello Girls have not, and they are very much overdue. So today, we have a distinguished group of guests joining for a conversation on the Hello Girls and the pressing need for the Congressional Gold Medal. So appearing today on the podcast are Miss Catherine Bourgin, born in Washington, D.C., and a graduate of Mary Washington College in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Ms. Bourgin worked in the English departments at two different polytechnic universities in France. She has traveled extensively in Europe, worked for the U.S. government, raised three children, and has a variety of interests, among them European and American history and beekeeping, which is super cool. Ms. Bourgin is also the granddaughter of Hello Girl Marie Edmee LeRoux. So we have Mr. Daniel Dayton, a senior U.S. government executive, was appointed the executive director of the World War I Centennial Commission in 2015. He has served as the designated federal official for the commission since 2013. Before coming to the commission, Mr. Dayton was engaged in special project work for the Science and Technology Directorate of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security from 2012 to 2014. He was detailed from S&T to the U.S. Naval History and Heritage Command from 2011 to 2012 to lead public affairs efforts in connection with the Navy's commemoration of the bicentennial of the War of 1812 and the Star-Spangled Banner, an effort which resulted in exposure for the Navy of 500,000 people in 15 cities over 120 days. Mr. Dayton's broad business background includes radio and television station ownership over a span of more than 20 years. In addition to his civilian accomplishments, Dan was active as a member of the U.S. Navy Reserve, retiring from that service as a captain in February of 2005. His last assignment was as commanding officer of the Reserve Public Affairs Unit, providing key support to the U.S. Strategic Command in Omaha, Nebraska. Also joining us is Dr. Allison S. Finkelstein, who serves as senior historian at Arlington National Cemetery. She earned her PhD in U.S. history from the University of Maryland, College Park, where she also studied historic preservation. Dr. Finkelstein previously worked as a historian for the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services History Office and Library, and as a historical consultant at both the American Battle Monuments Commission and the United States of America Vietnam War Commemoration Office. As a public historian, her projects have included the creation of museum exhibits, publications, interpretive and education programs, documentary films, webinars, tours, and more. A specialist on the First World War from 2017 to 2018, the Arlington County Board appointed her as the chair of the Arlington World War I Commemoration Task Force. Miss Claudia Friddell, the award-winning and starred-reviewed author of 8 narrative nonfiction books, including Grace Banker and her Hello Girls, Answer the Call, and To the Front, Clara Barton Braves the Battle of Antietam. A former teacher, Claudia is inspired by the students, educators, history buffs, and avid readers who she meets at author events across the country. Also joining us today are Colonel Linda Jantzen, US Army retired, who has spent over 30 years in the United States Army Signal Corps, including deployments to Iraq, Somalia, Bosnia, Kuwait, and Afghanistan. She's now a professor at the National Defense University's College of Information and Cyberspace in Washington, D.C. As a career Signal Corps officer, Linda sees the Hello Girls of World War I as an inspiration to current and future soldiers and those who support them, especially those who work in the critical cyber and information technology specialties. In June 2019, James received the prestigious 2019 Media and Entertainment Award from the Daughters of the American Revolution at their National Defense Night ceremony of their 128th DAR Continental Congress at DAR Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. Miss Carolyn Timbie also joins us. Carolyn is the granddaughter of Grace Banker, chief operator of the first women's telephone unit that sailed to France in March 1918, and the only woman in the Signal Corps to be awarded the Distinguished Service Medal in World War I. Carolyn's family has an extensive collection of letters, scrapbooks, and artifacts that belong to her grandmother. Numerous authors, directors, documentary and musical, and educators sought out Carolyn to provide primary source information on Grace Banker. Carolyn is passionate about the Hello Girls and her grandmother and is excited to share their story with audiences whenever she has the opportunity. Carolyn recently retired from a 36-year career as an occupational therapist. She looks forward to having more time to spend on her grandmother's story and to get the word out to see that the Hello Girls are honored with the Congressional Gold Medal. And we also have Miss Phyllis J. Wilson, president of the Military Women's Memorial in Arlington, Virginia. She served 37 years as a military intelligence voice intercept operator. She has served around the globe, visiting more than 35 countries in Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, and North America. She retired with the rank of Chief Warrant Officer 5. Ms. Wilson has also been deployed several times to Iraq as an intelligence analyst with special operations. Right, I believe that is everyone here. So if I may, thank you so much. I am deeply humbled to have everybody here, and I really look forward to the conversation. All right. And if we may, I'll go in here with the first question. So I think the best way to begin this discussion is to travel back close to the beginning of this journey. And I'd like to take us back to 1918, the last year of World War I, and the one that saw the Hello Girls in action. So Ms. Bourgin and Ms. Timbie, if you would, you are direct descendants of 2 of the Hello Girls. Could you tell us a little bit about them? Tell us a little bit of their stories. And we can go alphabetically. So Ms. Bourgin, if you'd like to go first.
Well, thank you, Mike. I'm very happy to be here and to share the story of my grandmother. Her name was Marie Edmee LeRoux, and she was born in February of 1895 in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. A few years after her birth, her family moved to Providence, Rhode Island. In 1910, we find that she's a student at Rhode Island School of Design. She was 15 years old. Sadly, in 1911, her father, my great-grandfather, dies. And by the end of 1912, her mother is remarried and has moved away from Rhode Island, heading south, Philadelphia, and eventually into Washington, D.C. and Maryland. But in 1918, Edmee is now 23 years old, and she's in New York City, and she's with the US Army Signal Corps in Unit 4. She's being trained as a telephone operator with AT&T. She took an oath, and she put on the US Army Signal Corps uniform to be in the AEF. So she was part of this group of 233 bilingual women who answered the call of the nation and of General Pershing. They attended training sessions to learn how to use the cutting-edge technology of their day, which is the telephone switchboard, and AT&T supported the training effort. And in the same building, they went to the rooftop where they practiced military marching and drills and etiquette, and took some official unit photos on the rooftop. So sometimes when you look at the photos, if their hair is a little mussed, it was windy up there. But in June of 1918, Edmee and Unit 4, which she was assigned to, they shipped out of Hoboken, New Jersey on the USS Lapland. It's an interesting looking ship because it looks like zebras. Their camouflage was like zebra stripes back then.
Right. The dazzle painting.
Yes. So the Lapland was a troop ship, and it crossed the Atlantic. And of course, that was patrolled by German U-boats. So it was a dangerous crossing for everybody. And then according to the U.S. Army Signal Corps muster rolls, she was stationed in Paris in October and December of 1918, as well as Tours, France. I'm unsure of the exact order, but those are the two areas that are places she was stationed. As a side note, like I said, AT&T trained them, but AT&T had like a newspaper. It was like a monthly newspaper called the Telephone Review, and they talked about everything about the telephone system and news related. But during World War I, in each monthly issue, they interviewed a handful of the women from the U.S. Army Signal Corps, and Edmee was in the December 1918 issue. And I was thrilled to have found it. It was late one night on a Google hunt, and it popped up. But even more so, it was very exciting to read my grandmother's own words and get a sense of some of her wartime experiences. And if you'd like, I could read a few quick excerpts from it.
Yes.
It's subtitled An Old Sweet Song. It says, in the meantime, the girls back in GHQ, as they call it, and those located in other places work and play with a will. At Tours, Miss Edmee LeRoux tells us how she had no time for loneliness, as she had the pleasure of taking up once more the threads of broken relationships and of renewing her study of music. She also speaks of trips into the country and experiences in the performance of her work. So midnight, September 3rd, 1918. She says, while I was in Tours, I spent the wonderful days. The weather was delightful, warm, and hardly any rain to speak of. We were attending conferences, and we had plenty of spare time, and I used to go out into the country on long trips, visiting chateaus and old farms where real old people lived as their ancestor had a good 100 years ago. One particular old farm that I visited will forever stay in my mind. It was quite a distance from Tours, and the trip there was particularly lovely for the reason that I passed many homes built right in a huge rock. At one of these places, the old people were very much interested in us, in our uniform, and especially in our boys. The old lady said that never an American regiment would pass by her front door without giving them some flowers from her garden. They were from Alsace, and how they loved their country. I sang an old Alsatian song for them, and I accompanied myself on an old organ they had. There was that dear old man listening so quietly with big tears in his eyes. It made him so happy to hear the song once more that he could not thank me enough. And then there was another little brief, interesting insight. She had to fill in at the last minute for an operator who was sick and couldn't take the night duty shift. So another hello girl, Miss Bada, and my grandmother volunteered to work all night, and here we are, she says. Just as I was finishing my last sentence, our wire chief, who is wonderful to us all, brought us 2 more steaming hot coffee, 10 toasts with a lot of butter on them, and some sliced tomatoes. Can you imagine a lovelier meal for 2 starved girls in the middle of the night? No, you can't. I have found all my dear old friends here in Paris and my girlfriends who have been studying music since before the war broke out, and I've renewed our friendships as well as musical entertainments among ourselves. I use all my spare time in continuing my lessons so that my life is well filled and with no time for loneliness. So that's just a few little excerpts from this article, which I think is marvelous, absolutely marvelous.
Yeah, what a
So,
connection. I was just
yeah,
thinking that song singing the Alsatian song for the French people.
for
Like
this,
that's awesome.
yeah, it is. I'm speechless about it. It's very moving. So, as I've mentioned, she was a voice music student or studying singing. And on the June 1918 U.S. Army Corps muster roll, they listed alongside the women's names their what's the word I'm looking for? Like their husbands or their parents' names. And in this case, my grandmother had a guardian listed who was Arthur Plamondon. He was a famous French-Canadian tenor and teacher in Quebec, New York, and Paris. And under his tutelage, she studied music and singing. Arthur Plamondon had opened a music school with his first wife, Alice Michaud, who was a French singer in the early 1900s, and Edmee became a student of the school. She won a French scholarship to continue her studies in Paris, but the war interrupted it all. After World War I, she stayed in Paris she stayed in Paris to pursue her music studies with Arthur Plamondon, who played a significant role in her life for the next 20 years as a teacher, mentor, and a friend until 1939. This is when she had to flee Paris with my mother, who was 4 years old before the Nazi invasion and the fall of Paris. She went to Saint-Tropez for about 2 years. Somehow, she and my mother made it to Lisbon, Portugal, and managed to gain passage on the SS Excalibur to New York City in December of 1941. On the very next crossing, the same ship was bombed. Now, Edmee is 47 years old and when she has returned to the U.S. In closing, I'd like to say that I'm very proud of my grandmother, Edmee LeRoux. She was a courageous, independent woman with a strong spirit and a sense of duty. She lived on 2 continents. She was a veteran of World War I and a survivor of World War II, a music student, a singer, a mother, and a patriot of her time. All these women of the U.S. Army Signal Corps were patriots. Bestowing on them the Congressional Gold Medal is an opportunity to build on their legacy, to honor them, and to show respect as a nation to them and their families for what they accomplished in their time, which was above and beyond the ordinary. And I want to give a shout out to all the descendants that I hope our words reach you and that you contact us and we can grow our group and go to Capitol Hill to convince our congressman to do the right thing. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you for that. What a wonderful story, and what an amazing life. Like, gosh, the things our grandparents and great grandparents went through just in the course of their lives. Yes. So, if I may, just want to part of the call to action here is just to visit the World War I Centennial Commission website, which is World War #1 Centennial.org, and there you will find a page. You can just look up the Congressional Gold Medal for the Hello Girls. You'll find the page, and it'll have the information with your state's senators and representatives, and ways to reach out and contact them. All right, if I may, Miss Timbie, would you share your grandmother's story?
Absolutely. And thank you, Mike, for the opportunity to speak. So my name is Carolyn Timbie, and I am the granddaughter of Grace Banker, who was the chief operator of the first unit of 33 Signal Corps women who, better known as the Hello Girls, who traveled to France. Unfortunately, I never met my grandmother. She passed away before I was born, but I am very grateful to her letters and diaries she kept in her childhood and during her service in the Signal Corps. I am very proud and honored to share her story with you. Grace Banker was raised in Passaic, New Jersey, and was one of 4 children. Her brother Eugene later would also serve in the American Expeditionary Forces. Grace was an adventurous, independent young woman. She enjoyed the outdoors and was active in numerous clubs at school, including theater, baseball, and French club. She went on to attend Barnard College, and she double majored in French and history. In 1915, she graduated from Barnard, and she landed a job at AT&T headquarters in New York City, and she worked her way up to be a switchboard instructor in the long distance division. In late 1917, she saw the newspaper and placed by the Army for bilingual women telephone operators that were fluent in French. She applied and was offered the position of chief operator of the first unit of Signal Corps girls. After extensive training and drills, Grace Banker's unit set sail to France on the troop ship, the Celtic, on March 6, 1918. As they sailed out of New York City harbor, Grace put on a brave face, and though she expressed her vulnerable side in her diary, and I quote, with faces glued to portholes and doors, watched the Statue of Liberty fade from sight. For the first time, suddenly realized what a responsibility I have on my young shoulders. The women were aware that there was high risk of being torpedoed by German subs lurking beneath the waters as they crossed the Atlantic Ocean. Upon arrival in France, Grace was assigned to Chomeau at General Army headquarters, and that's about 2 hours away from Paris. She was under the command of General Bourgin. She and the other women lived in a nice home, or called a hostess house, that was overseen by the YWCA. In July, she received word of her father's death, which had a profound impact on her. She worried about her mother and sisters and how they would manage. She also expressed concern about her brother's safety, as he served in the field artillery somewhere out in the battlefields of France. At the office, the women quickly demonstrated they were efficient and they were hard workers. They were highly regarded by the officers, and there was no question that their expertise was vital to the war effort. Grace was proud of her girls, as she called them. She had a unique ability to supervise, to enforce rules, but she also had a very fun spirit and a playful side to her. So she really walked the line of responsibility and being a fun person to be around. Many of the women wanted to move closer to the front lines, but the officers were concerned it would be risky, especially for the women. At last, August 25th, 1918, Grace and 5 other operators were ordered nearer to the battlefields and to serve at the 1st Army headquarters. So they're moving closer to where the action is. Near the front, Grace and the women, they lived and worked under one roof in a flimsy barrack in extreme and dangerous conditions. It was very cold, it was wet, it was muddy, not to mention living under war conditions. Whereas in Chomeau, their previous residence, the women lived in their own house and meals were prepared for them. Here, each woman was assigned a helmet, gas mask, and a mess kit. On one occasion, Grace stepped outside and was nearly hit by shrapnel. That landed just a few feet away from her. She was reprimanded by her chief signal officer for going outside without her helmet. She never did that again. The women communicated over special operations switchboards, also known as the battle lines. They used top secret code words for names and locations in order to elude the enemy. Their town of Souilly was known as Wide Wing. They translated calls from French and English under strenuous circumstances, All the while, they had to work quickly and remain calm under pressure. The men and women worked closely as a team. Grace expressed in her diary that there was tremendous camaraderie and respect between the women and the officers of the First Army. After the armistice, Grace moved to Paris and eventually was assigned to President Woodrow Wilson's residence. She found the work not particularly interesting, in her words, and soon after she transferred to work with the Army of Occupation in Koblenz, Germany. And there she received the Distinguished Service Medal. And I quote, "For exceptionally meritorious and distinguished services, she served with exceptional ability as chief operator in the Signal Corps Exchange at General Headquarters, American Expeditionary Forces, and later in a similar capacity at First Army Headquarters. By untiring devotion to her exacting duties under trying conditions, she did much to assure the success of the telephone service during the operations of the First Army against the Saint-Mihiel salient and the operations to the north of Verdun." In a handwritten note I came across, she noted General Liggett's trembling fingers as he pinned the medal to her uniform. And I'm thinking he'd never done this before because he never pinned it on a woman's uniform before.
Right.
So I thought that was pretty funny. So after World War I, Grace Banker, she was considered a celebrity upon her return home in September 1919 after 18 months of service. She was approached by reporters and was featured in the papers across the country, but it was clear from reading her letters that she disliked being in the public eye and wanted to resume a normal life. She worked for the YWCA in New York City, and she did not return to AT&T after the war. She met my grandfather, Eugene Paddock, and married in 1922, and they had 4 children. My mother was her youngest and only daughter. Grace's son, Eugene, served in World War II, also in the Signal Corps, and he returned home after the war, suffering from PTSD. Later, she expressed, following in a letter, "I consider war to be the world's worst plague. One glimpse into an evacuation hospital would make a pacifist out of anyone." While my grandmother was busy raising 4 children, she did all she could to support the 6-year fight for the Hello Girls to get their veteran status, as they were denied their veteran status upon their return home. And that is a whole other story, which I know someone will delve into. She and my grandfather enjoyed trips to New Hampshire, and in 1955, they built a cottage on Lake Winnipesaukee, where she enjoyed swimming, canoeing, and visits from her children. We still have that cottage in our family, and I'm so proud to. It's a really strong memory for me. Grace had strong faith and was a member of the Episcopal Church. She was engaged in numerous civic activities in Scarsdale, New York, where she lived out the rest of her life. Sadly, she never lived to see the day when the Hello Girls were recognized for their service. She died in 1960 at the age of 68 of breast cancer. Although my grandmother spoke little of her service in World War I, she kept all her papers and her artifacts, which were tucked away for years in her Signal Corps pack chest that eventually came to reside under my family's basement stairs as I was growing up. I never fully understood the Hello Girls story until reading Elizabeth Cobb's book, The Hello Girls, America's First Women Soldiers. It has been a life-changing event, and I'm so very proud of my grandmother and of the Hello Girls and the ability to pass along the story and their legacy. And I feel very strongly to see that they are given the Congressional Gold Medal, as it has been so long overdue. And it is a story that I feel that, anybody in schools and university, everybody has been denied, and that this is something the world needs to see as they've left their impact. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Timbie. What a What an amazing story as well. And she was, you know, like the first chief operator. So like,
Correct.
trailblazer,
And there were a total of there were six chief operators. She just happened to be for the first unit. Yes.
wow, just amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. Next
Thank
we're
you.
gonna turn to Miss Friddell. You've produced a book on Grace Banker and her Hello Girls. Could you tell us a bit about your work, what drove you to create it, and why the Hello Girls remain important today? Oh, I think you're still muted.
There you go. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, perfect.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me and including me. This has been a wonderful journey. I write narrative nonfiction. So at times, not always, I get to interact with the relatives of some of my subjects. And it's a special honor, especially with so many heroic women and their families now. So I was going to show the cover of the book. Elizabeth Baddeley is the illustrator. And so I write narrative nonfiction books. Many of them are picture books. I was an elementary school teacher for years, and I used those types of books to teach in all of my different subjects. I wrote Grace Banker and her Hello Girls, Answer the Call. And I often look for historical figures and events in U.S. history that I think are important and inspiring and relatable for today's young readers. And I have a very special place in my heart for unsung heroes. And so I was inspired to write about the World War I Signal Corps operators after reading Elizabeth Cobb's amazing book, The Hello Girls, that Carolyn Timbie just mentioned. I literally couldn't put it down, and I just couldn't believe that these were the first women soldiers and the struggle and the fight that they had to have the recognition as veterans. And the whole story was fascinating to me. And it, it's not just about Grace Banker. There's so many fascinating women. I just couldn't decide initially how I might like to tell that story. So anyway, I attended Jim Ferris's documentary premiere, which is absolutely fabulous. And I recommend that everybody see that. It brings me to tears every time I watch it. And there, I not only had the honor of meeting Jim and Elizabeth Cobbs, who wrote the book, but I got to meet Carolyn Timbie and Mark Ho. And as you know, you've just met Carolyn. It was such a treat and an honor to meet her. And we've had this wonderful working relationship and friendly relationship ever since then, to be able to promote the Hello Girls. And Mark is the attorney who was instrumental in helping the Hello Girls finally win their full veteran status after their 60-year battle. And he is just a hero to me also. So after Carolyn so generously shared her grandmother's diary, along with a treasure trove of World War I mementos at her grandmother's cabin, which was just a treat of a lifetime for me, that I got to sit in Grace Banker's chair and look out the view at the lake where she spent some of her later years, and going through all of these amazing, diaries and newspaper articles and artifacts. I knew that she would make the perfect protagonist for a book, to try to tell and share the Hello Girls story, these Signal Corps operators that were so important to help winning World War I, I just thought they made excellent role models for young readers. And I thought it was an important story that everyone should know. I was really also thrilled to have Elizabeth Baddeley illustrate my book, because she, like I, am from Kansas City. She lives there still, and that's not far from where the World War I Memorial and Museum is. And so I thought it was really special to have that connection. And I just wanted to say just one little thing, or maybe two little things. I really, when I write my books, whenever possible, I like to intersperse the actual words of my characters. And so it was wonderful to have access to Grace Banker's diary, and she was a wonderful writer. But I wanted to just read just a couple of the excerpts of her diary where she's describing what it was like. She said, 2 hours sleep in 2 days, but didn't notice it. The names of all the places here and further fronts beyond are known under code names: Waterfall, Buster, Bonehead, Podunk Jam, etc. All mean someplace very definite. The codes are changed frequently, so I have to keep up on everything. And then she describes their working environment. Our office is most primitive. 3 switchboards, not another stick of furniture. There was 1 large packing box, so I decided to use that as a combined chair and desk. Once on top, I felt as though I were up on a mountain. I wouldn't exchange this bare office for any other. I love it here. So you get the sense that they were just so devoted and so loyal and so happy to contribute. And yet she was so, like I'm sure all of the other women, were very humble. And when she received her Distinguished Service Medal, she said, "There are many who saw far more service than I, and many who earned medals even if they did not receive them. Mine I consider as a tribute to the girls who worked under me at the First Army and to the Signal Corps men operators scattered throughout France in the tiny field offices." So anyway, I just loved every minute of working on this project, and I'm so happy to be a part of continuing to help the cause of trying to make sure that they are recognized with the Congressional Gold Medal.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, what a great way to spread the word, and an inspiring story for kids, and not very well known up until now. So thank you so much. Colonel Jantzen, if we can turn to you. So battlefield technology has evolved exponentially since the days of the telephone switchboards. So what role do the Hello Girls play in the history of the Army Signal Corps, and how is their story still relevant to signal and cyber soldiers today? And I'm happy to ask these again, but why is official recognition like the Congressional Gold Medal still important more than 100 years on?
Yeah. Hi, Mike, and hi, everyone. Thanks. I tell you that, my answer is personal, because just listening to these stories, as much as I've heard about it, is so inspiring to me. So it's really important that we spread the word. Now, the Signal Corps in particular still exists, of course, and today they're using much more advanced technologies and things. But if you think about it, the legacy of the Signal Corps is that if there was a new technology, whether it be airplanes, telephones, weather, whatever it was given to the Signal Corps to figure out how to use it for the Army. And so these women were really part of that. In addition, there was this legacy of partnership with industry. So even as late as the Gulf War and beyond, you'd have telephone banks there for soldiers to line up and call home. I mean, you cannot, one common saying now is you cannot deploy an American soldier without giving them the ability to call home. And so a very important legacy, and these women were part of the development of that technology. The telephone wasn't even invented until 1876. And so this idea of massive networks, and that we sent technicians over to build a network in France, and that these women were really at the center of it all and making the whole system work, is really inspiring. And that was a time of rapid technological change. You might have thought, if you lived at the time, that you just couldn't keep up with all the new technologies. That's how people feel today. So it's totally relatable. The other relatable thing is just the experience of going to war, right? These women didn't know what they were getting into. They had never imagined that they would be doing this, but they had a skill. They saw their brothers and fathers going off to war to contribute to the war effort. And I'm sure they had a longing to do that. That's why they volunteered. And that's the whole spirit of our volunteer Army. And, inspiring people to contribute in whatever way they can. And these women had a very special skill and a dedication. And I think myself and anybody who's ever deployed, with the Signal Corps in particular, is on the way over, you're worried, is this going to work? Is my equipment going to work? Am I going to be able to maintain it? Is it going to be able to help? And so all those, I can hear in the stories that I heard from Catherine and Carolyn and Claudia, that these things are on their mind. They want things to work. They know how critical it is. They know how dedicated they are. So official recognition, I think, is super important. And again, the Army, is they make decisions based on lineage and heraldry of units. They update their records. Anybody in the future, myself included, I teach now, and I'm always doing research and learning about new things that happen. If it weren't for these types of official recognition, it may not ever be entered into the record. And so making sure that things are documented, especially service in the military, even though, these women are long gone, is important for current and future historians and people documenting the record, and also for people considering joining the service. And so, the Army is always, big part of the mission is recruiting. And I believed in the slogan that says, you have to see it to be it. And so, somebody who may not have ever thought that they could contribute and joining the military would read this story or see the film or learn about these women who never imagined themselves in that position and be inspired by it and say, yeah, I can do that too. And I want to do that. So whether it's, medals like Grace Banker got, or it's an inscription on a headstone, that might be the thing that just inspires somebody to go learn more. So I think it's so important, and I'm so proud to be part of this effort to get the Congressional Gold Medal and official national recognition for these women.
Awesome. And just to go back to the technology component, while we, folks listening may think of the Hello Girls as, switchboard operators, yes, that is true, but not in the civilian sense. I fear I'm out of date here, but I want to make a comparison to the Hello Girls. Like they were like the if anybody has ever watched like a Vietnam War era film, they were the radio guy, the one with the radio on his back making phone calls. They weren't up there at the front, but they were pretty far close to it for Miss Banker to nearly be wounded by shrapnel. So these were not switchboard operators. They were battlefield, tactical communication specialists here, like helping the combat operations going on in the Meuse-Argonne and elsewhere on the Western Front. And again, man, like, yes, just honoring them now. Yeah, it's an inspiration for other women to join the service and know that their contribution will be recognized and that they matter. And that the Hello Girls matter as well. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Mr. Dayton, when did the story of the Hello Girls come to the attention of the World War I Centennial Commission? And how has the Centennial Commission been working to place the Hello Girls in their well-deserved spot in American military and cultural history?
Well, Mike, thanks so much for bringing this group together today. And to your point, I refer to them as America's first women soldiers. That's what they really were. They really were in a combat zone. So that's kind of what we've been trying to underscore with members of the Congress. So the World War I Centennial Commission that I lead as its executive director is a federal government agency. It's charged with advising the Congress and President as to suitable commemorations for the centennial of World War I. So one of the actions the commission recommended was the recognition of the Hello Girls with a Congressional Gold Medal. So it's kind of unique that the Congress said, hey, tell us what your ideas are and we'll implement them. So that's what we're doing. This is one of those critical things. Among other things, including a National World War I Memorial here in Washington that we're very proud of. The commission very early on in its existence discussed Hello Girls with its senior advisors, and it was October of 2018 that the commission issued a proclamation advising the Congress, its mission and law, to move forward with its recognition. This is the third Congress that we have approached with this nonpartisan recommendation. The Congressional Budget Office has advised us that the cost is insignificant, so that's not a stumbling block. As I said, it's nonpartisan. We're very grateful for the efforts of Senators John Testa and Marsha Blackburn, and especially to Representative Emanuel Cleaver of Kansas City for their support in bringing this issue to the Senate and to the House, respectively. The commission will sunset in the fall of next year. So now is the time to get this done. So that's why I so appreciate everybody on this call and the effort that they're doing to get this done. We've researched World War I connections for each senator and many representatives. We've delivered packages of background information, developed display material for use in supporters' offices, developed a database of Hello Girls, and that's, as you mentioned, Mike, that's at ww1cc.org/Hello Girls. And we held two events just this year with the folks who are with us today, one in the House and one in the Senate. We have committed to, this is new news, I think, to most of the group here, we've committed to staging Hello Girls, the musical, here in Washington in the spring, to which we will invite local members of Congress and, of course, all of you. We have found no one on the Hill who objects to this action. There's no controversy. Today is a great day, then, to call your senators and representatives and ask them to co-sponsor these bills. I'm told by staffers that telephone calls to the local offices of members of Congress are the most effective way to get the message across. One staffer told me that her job every morning was to call all the local offices for her boss and find out what the issues were back home in the district. So that may be a little entree for us, is to call the local offices instead of the Washington office, where, of course, you're going to get voicemail. You get to talk to a human when you call back home. So that's where we are. Again, we certainly appreciate everyone's support. Any of the materials that we have developed are absolutely available to everyone on the call and anyone who wants to help in this effort.
Thank you for that. And again, folks, this is not a partisan issue in Congress. Both political parties agree to it. It's just as it's been described to me, it's just inertia. It's just, just generating the enthusiasm and the motivation to get it done. So as Mr. Dayton just said, to the listeners here in the U.S., phone calls to your local congressman's office, Congress member's office. So very good. Thank you. Ms. Wilson, as president of the Women's Military Memorial and no stranger to military life and deployments, can you tell us just how groundbreaking it was that these 223 women deployed as soldiers with the AEF during World War I? And where does their contribution to women's military service stand in the historical timeline?
Thank you so much. And yes, it's been an honor. I've served as the president of the Military Women's Memorial for going on 4 years now. And I can tell you that in those 37 years that I served in signals intelligence, I never once heard about the Hello Girls. 37 years in the same army in which they served. How can that be? Why did I not know? And it's not for lack of me being exposed to a lot of information. And so when I learned about this, I was like, I'm all in. We've got to tell their stories. And when we talked about, you said about the shrapnel earlier, these women were on the front lines. The artillery was shaking their equipment. And when we think about Grace Banker as that early senior operator, think about this. Over 16,000 signal officers were eligible for that Distinguished Service Medal in World War I. 16,000 officers. She got one of only 18 people that in the entire Signal Corps in World War I got one of these medals. She was all that in a bag of chips. At the age of 25, she led these women in an incredible battle. And it was not until 1977 that they were given veteran status. Many of those, as we talked about earlier, were already passed away, so it went to their families. Now the Congressional Gold Medal. It's imperative that their families know that what they did back over 100 years ago laid the groundwork for all of us that have had incredible opportunities to serve in ways they could never have imagined. But they stepped forward. Now, half of the men in World War I volunteered. Even to this day, 100% of the women that serve in the military, we all volunteer because it's our country too. And they felt that need and that opportunity. They connected, think about this, folks, 150,000 calls every day. 150,000 calls in a war zone, and they did it 6 times faster than the men that had come before them. The guys were just slower at making those connections and patching people through from the front lines all the way back to General Pershing himself. Now I'm still looking for the final definitive information on this, but rumor has it that General Pershing himself credited these 223 women with shortening the length of World War I by a full year. 223 women alone, just men or women, it doesn't matter. That's small but mighty right there. And so when we look at what they did, it was crucial. It was imperative. They saved lives. They saved entire battalions by connecting and making sure that the information got to the right people that could make a change. For anybody that's familiar with the military, think about you're on a war front like World War I was, mustard gas, trenches, horrible. Well, when the enemy is coming towards you and you're getting overrun, suddenly you have, for the first time in history, the capacity in seconds to connect back to a level higher than you that can say, hey, the unit on the left side of that unit is not engaged. Call them, tell them to get their butts over there and save these guys. And they did it. And it could have never happened if not for these switchboard operators. That's why I think the Congressional Gold Medal is incredibly important, because it sets a tone and tells that story that encourages men and women, boys and girls, to understand our history, but also then look to the future. So I encourage anybody that comes to Arlington National Cemetery, the Military Women's Memorial, we sit at the entrance to it. It's a half circle curved wall, and behind that is the Education Center. And we have a lovely small exhibit with beautiful paintings of the Hello Girls sitting there doing their job with their gas mask and their helmet hanging over the back of their chairs, knowing that at any time they have to don that. And why did it take so long for them to even get recognition that they were veterans? And now let's get them recognition. Call your congressman, call your senator, make sure that they are sponsored. And I will tell you, I'm up on Capitol Hill frequently enough that the primary reason they are not sponsoring, they just haven't heard about it. So make your voices known. It only takes 2 or 3 phone calls to any of these offices that suddenly one of the staffers will look it up and say, hey, boss, this is coming in. You need to know about it. When they read about it, who wouldn't support this? The only reason they're not, in my mind, they don't know yet. So we need America to pick up the phone, send an email, contact your elected official. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wilson. And of all the reasons for why this Congressional Gold Medal hasn't yet happened, this is potentially like the best one, like simply because like our Congress members haven't heard of it, and so like the fix there is pretty easy. Like we just like you said, like we just need to get on the phone. And in fact, that reminds me, as soon as this is done, I'm getting on the phone myself. So very good. So just we're going to move to Dr. Finkelstein. So as senior historian at Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C., why is it important for the Hello Girls to receive the Congressional Gold Medal? And I certainly know we've talked about it, but I very much want to hear your thoughts. And also, and I apologize, it was a bit of a man's glance of a Google search here. So I have to ask a potentially silly question. Are any Hello Girls buried at Arlington? I've seen that members of another groundbreaking women's unit, the 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion, some members of that World War II unit are buried at Arlington, and they rightfully received that distinction. But I'm unaware of if any Hello Girls are buried there.
Well, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate having the opportunity to be on this podcast to address those questions, which are actually really linked and get at the heart of why I think, as a historian, it's so important for the United States to recognize these women with the Congressional Gold Medal. So if you will bear with me, what we have to do first is talk about the history of why the Hello Girls were not recognized as being members of the U.S. Army. And this is really the crux of the issue when it comes to both whether they are buried at Arlington National Cemetery or other national cemeteries, and also why this recognition is so desperately needed. When the U.S. Army recruited these women to serve as telephone operators, women were not allowed to officially fully serve in the U.S. military. Women could only serve in a few capacities. Women could serve as Army and Navy nurses, in which capacity they were in the military, and they did receive veteran status, but they were not equal to men in their nursing capacity. And what I mean by that is they did not have rank that was equal to men's or full authority over the men in their care, which is really confusing and hard for us to understand today, but it was intended to ensure that these women did not have a lot of power or authority. So that Army and Navy nurses were in the military, but not with the same status as those men. The U.S. Navy during World War I actually used a loophole in the law to allow women to fully officially enlist in the Navy for the first time. Temporarily, but they did it. So they were kicked out after the war, but they had full and equal status to men in the Navy. That was not the case in the Army. So the Army could not bring these telephone operators in as soldiers, and in fact, they really refused to do so. What they did instead was they brought them on as civilian contract workers. This is very similar to our government contractors today. But these women were really not clear on that situation during the war. They were in uniform, they had a rank, so they thought, and they swore an oath. They had paperwork. To them, it seemed like they were in the military. But once they got out, once the war ended, they soon found out that they were never fully in the military. They were only ever civilian employees. They were not service members, and they were barred from receiving any kind of veteran status. So they couldn't get veterans health care. They couldn't have burial in a national cemetery. They couldn't get their bonus, which became really important during the Great Depression. So what these women were fighting for in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, the 1970s, was to have official recognition as military veterans. And they did finally get that in the late 1970s, but it was far too late for most of these women, including, as we heard from Carolyn, for Chief Operator Grace Banker. So for me, if the United States government is to recognize these women with the Congressional Gold Medal, it helps make amends for that gender-based discrimination that prevented these women from receiving what was due to them for serving their country voluntarily, as Phyllis really emphasized. This is a way that we can try to make a wrong a little bit better. And it's really not good enough because these women are no longer with us. Many of them never received these benefits at all. Many of them never lived to see them. But what we can at least do today is bestow this medal on them for their relatives, their descendants, for America's young people, particularly our young women. And this really brings me to another point. If we want our young women and other young people to continue to volunteer for the military in what is still an all-volunteer force today, we have to demonstrate that the government will not forget them. And so many young people are unaware of this story, just like other people of other generations. We need to tell this story and demonstrate that if you serve your country, you won't be forgotten. I also want to just add one more important part of this puzzle. The Hello Girls were not the only group of unrecognized female veterans from the First World War. There were many other women who served and were in the same situation as the Hello Girls. The Reconstruction aides, for example, who were physical and occupational therapists during the war, many of who went over to France and were helping the wounded, they didn't receive that status. They didn't get any recognition until the 1980s. The dietitians, many other women from World War I, were pioneers and were breaking ground and were tossed aside after the war. So by giving the Hello Girls this recognition, we can help to recognize all of those other women from World War I. And as a collective, they can take their place in the history of the U.S. So this takes us back now to your question, which is not a dumb question at all. Are there any Hello Girls buried at Arlington National Cemetery? I don't have an answer for you yet. I haven't found any. And the reason is because unless they died after that legislation that gave them veteran status, they would not have been eligible for burial at Arlington. So to answer the question, what I'm working on, what I have to do, is go through the list of all of the Hello Girls and manually try to figure out if any of them are buried at Arlington, which is going to involve figuring out if they got married, because most likely, if they're buried at the cemetery, they would be there because of their husband's veterans or military status. And if any of you have ever researched women from the past who changed their last names, they get lost in the record, particularly if they go by their husband's name, like Mrs. John Smith instead of Mrs. Abigail Smith. So it's tricky. There are some graves of Hello Girls at National Cemetery Administration, cemeteries run by the Veterans Administration, so we know about them. And there is a Hello Girl buried, I believe, at Suresnes American Cemetery in Paris, who was buried there. I think she died either, I think 1919, correct me if I'm wrong, someone.
No, November 11th, 1918.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Yes, and I think it was of influenza or complications from influenza. So she was buried there at an American overseas military cemetery, which of course confused these women even more because this was an irregularity. If she was buried at the cemetery, doesn't that mean that they were veterans? Well, no, it didn't. So it's really a story of women being lost to history. And I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's just all the more reason that we need to work together and call our representatives and our senators and ask for this one small type of honor to be given to these women.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Finkelstein, so much. Yeah, that answers my question perfectly. I was thinking of it, and I was like, well, of course, like, no, they would not be buried. They weren't recognized, not for a long time. So, and you explained that, but then also, yeah, like, wow. And just your answer explaining like how, I mean, like how many women, like they change their name when they get married, and that becomes so much more difficult to track them records wise. Wow. Yeah. Wow. That's quite a daunting task to see that. Amazing.
Wish me luck.
Yes, good luck. Good luck with that. And Colonel Jantzen, real quick, that the Hello Girl who's buried at Suresnes, that's Miss Inez Crittenden, correct? Okay.
Yes, Inez Crittenden. She was the chief operator of the second group. So right after Grace Banker brought her group, she spent most of her time in Paris and running a whole bunch of exchanges around Paris at a time when Paris was, of course, also subject to artillery and aerial bombing. Mm-hmm. But she died on November 11th, 1918. And, what got me kind of interested in her was I visited Suresnes Cemetery. It's beautiful, overlooking Paris.
Yes.
And I asked the superintendent there, why are there so many civilians in this cemetery? And they said, well, there are a lot of civilians. The Army grew so fast, from about 100,000 to 2.5 million overseas. They just didn't have all the specialties that they needed. And so if you were working for the Army at the time of your death, then you got to be buried there. But her headstone said civilian on it. And so I said, these women got recognized by legislation in the 1970s. So shouldn't it say something like, Signal Corps? And they said that if the next of kin requested it, that they would go ahead and fix it. And so through a whole process of people I knew in California, we tracked down Inez Crittenden's great niece and had her go ahead and request the new headstone. And it took the Army Battle Monuments Commission about 6 months after they got that request to get a new headstone up. And since then, even Vice President Harris has visited that cemetery, and the superintendent brought her right to Inez Crittenden's grave because she was from San Francisco, like the vice president. So it's just a great story. It's an inspiring story. And, without that knowledge, the book, the film, all of this information going around, we would have never known that story. So that's happening all over, by the way. Just like Catherine finding out, that her grandmother is eligible for this kind of recognition and getting a marker from the VA. So it's a great story.
Oh, thank you, Colonel Jantzen, for your efforts in helping make that happen. That's something you can be very, very proud of. Ms. Wilson, yes.
This is Phyllis. I'd love to weigh in on that again. To that point with Edmee, is here we're sitting up on Capitol Hill talking about these Hello Girls and what they've done. And Jim Theris, sadly, he can't join us today, but his documentary, which we screened at the Women's Memorial many times as well, but to have a family member, a granddaughter, to realize through our conversation just the last few months that your grandmother qualifies to have a proper veteran grave marker, and she's laid to rest just here in Maryland, just north of Washington, D.C. So the marker has been created in short order, and we're hoping that ideally we have January 19th set aside to go to Fort Lincoln Cemetery and have all of us and many more witness the unveiling of a Hello Girls proper grave marker that designates her as having served in the military in World War I. So it's still happening today. And I wouldn't be surprised, somebody on your podcast may well say, I've heard something about my grandmother or my great aunt, and do some research and find out, we still have time. We can fix some of these things that were overseen from long ago to make sure that the right and proper Department of Veterans Affairs grave marker can be installed over that lady's. The service she gave to this country deserves the proper marker, I think. So we're excited for what we get to do here in the next couple of months.
Wow, that's super cool. That's such an honor to properly honor her. Oh, that's great. That's great. So I'll open this to anyone. I think we all know, like folks listening, yes, you need to get on the phone and contact your local Congress member. And again, phone calls seem to work best. But any other closing thoughts on why listeners should take action and help get this done for the Hello Girls? Yes, please.
I would just add that this is an opportunity for us to really make a difference in the memory of people who we never had a chance to meet. But especially if you're a teacher or an educator out there and you're looking to find a personal connection to history, this is an opportunity to really get your students or your classmates, if you're a student yourself, to see that history really impacts people on a personal level. And it's not just some stuffy documents in an archive or a boring book without a lot of pictures. As I think you'll see when you read Claudia's book, these women are vivid. They were adventurous. They were exciting. And this is our opportunity to connect with them in a way that I don't think we get to connect in many other types of history. So think about it creatively if there's something you can do. If you want to use the wonderful music of the Hello Girls musical, or do an art project, or think of a different way to support us, please think outside of the box.
That's fantastic. I'm an educator myself, so that goes like straight to the heart. So wonderful. Thank you. All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to have everyone here, and here talking about the Hello Girls. Like, as family descendants and why we need to honor them with the Congressional Gold Medal. So I'm hoping that this podcast episode will be yet another just another tool to helping get that Congressional Gold Medal for those Hello Girls, for America's first women soldiers. So I will say, so for all of the wonderful folks listening in the United States, here is the call to action once again. So the link to support a Congressional Gold Medal for the World War I Hello Girls webpage will be in the podcast episode notes, so you can do it right from your phone. Please point your web browser to that page, find your state's congressional representative, follow the instructions on how to contact them about the Congressional Gold Medal for the Hello Girls. Again, phone calls seem to work best. This is not a partisan issue in Congress, and it's not getting done simply because they don't know about it. So just making a case of making your senators and representatives aware of the Hello Girls and how much they deserve this long-awaited recognition. Right. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming on.